Here we go. Oh, that's nice. What's going on, Excel fanatics? Vertex is here. Today we're going through a Microsoft tutorial template, but we were looking at an intro to Power Query. So let's go ahead and we'll start downloading that. So if you use the link in the description below, you can download it like I just did here. Alright, but first, what is Power Query? So the definition, I'll give you the link to this page if you want to read and kind of get a bit more technical about it, but the official definition is Power Query is a data transformation and data preparation engine. So essentially it's a tool that helps connect and clean data from other sources. Okay, so let's go ahead and start walking through this tutorial here. So I'm just going to read through this real quick. So does this happen to you? You paste data into Excel, but then you have to clean it up. For example, in the data below, there are a couple things you might want to do. So first, you might want to split this column into two columns, one for the first name, one for the last name. You also might want to remove the 12 a.m. from this. Right, so those are good call-outs for if you're just pasting a large data set. So your first instinct, if you're experienced with Excel, might just be like, okay, why don't I use text to columns here, and then why don't I use control find and then remove this for the 12 a.m. So yeah, because the thing is, you won't really use Power Query within the same file, and you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. You're most likely going to be using it more so when you're connecting it to maybe another Excel file or even the web. I do want to point out here too, actually, that they actually pasted this into a table. If you're not sure how to do that, if you ever paste a data set, you can actually go ahead and you can format things as tables. Because anytime you're using Power Query, it will automatically be put into a table for you. So tables are actually really great, and I actually recommend if you're using a data set to use tables, especially if you're using a pivot table. Because typically a pivot table you have to keep, like if you add more data underneath, say you're updating something monthly or weekly, whatever, you have to throw the data in underneath your data set. If you know what I'm talking, I'm talking a little abstract, but if you know what I'm talking about, you typically have to change the data source and then make sure that the date range or the data range is captured, so you have to expand on that. If you use a table instead, the pivot table just needs to be refreshed. You don't have to keep adjusting the capture range. So that's one way actually tables are really helpful, but I just wanted to kind of quickly touch on that. So, alright, so let's move on to the next part. You could clean up the data manually, but this can be time consuming. You could fix this by adding a new column. So this is their suggestions. This is what we just talked about, doing text to columns, and reformat this, right? So I said do control find to get rid of this. You can actually go up here, and just change that to the short date, and that will change. Forget manually cutting, pasting, and reformatting. A better way to clean up is to use Power Query. What is Power Query? It's a special editor that allows you to clean data so it's easier to work with. So this is the original data. We use Power Query. Now it's cleaned up. So again, it's using the example here is just meant to be an introduction where it's showing that the source is within the same data file. Like it's within the same tab. But normally you likely wouldn't do that for Power Query. Like I said, like this data would probably be in an entirely different file, and then you would be pulling it in here. And it's more so if you're working with like a bigger data set. But again, this is just meant to be an intro. So it's what it's showing is the example that there's some things being done through Power Query, which is a new window that actually opens up and where these actions are taking place. That's why it's kind of just showing an overview. But essentially it shows to separate the first and last name and then updating the order date. Another great thing about Power Query, if you add new data that's dirty, Power Query can clean that up too with just a click of a button. Try it out below. So if you see the enable content, I don't have enable content anywhere. Then on the data, okay, so it's saying that this is connected here, So you'll see I have verdexes split up. If I actually I'm supposed to go over to the data, refresh all, but it's not updating. So for whatever reason, this table actually isn't connected to this one. But if I try to replicate this myself, right? So if I do from table range, this is where the new window of Power Query will actually open up, right? So here we can actually, this is where the adjustments are made. So you see the sales rep. I'm going to split the column. At the space. Change the date. So you see the data type up top here. We're just going to change that down to date. And I want to rename these. So this was first name, last name. Okay, so notice on the right hand side it's actually recording my steps. So which you can actually rename these if you want it to be like, took this action, you know, it has some of those actions already, but it says like change type, you know, kind of these default sets, but you can rename those if you want to be more organized. So if I click back to source, this is how it originally was, and this is what we transformed it to. So if I go close and load, because we're done, Power Query will exit. And actually there's a whole new tab that opened up here, but it should replicate what was supposed to appear here, which it did. So that was my workaround through the intro. I don't know if that's the same case for you guys, but I just wanted to show you how that worked. Why do they call it Power Query? Between the original data and the clean data, there's a powerful query that links the two. So between the original data and the clean data, there's a query. The query contains all of the cleaning steps, so you don't have to redo them again if new data is added. All you have to do is click refresh, and Power Query cleans it up automatically. So that was kind of the steps aspect on the right-hand side that I was just talking about. There are three main steps to using Power Query: get, data, transform, and load. Data part, it's going to walk through it, but this is my quick summary of it. Get data is your source. Transform is what we just did to the data. We split the columns and we updated the formatting to the date. And then load was when we essentially just saved it. It kind of executed our changes. So first step is get data. This is simply the process of getting your data into Power Query. We'll show you how this works in the videos coming up. Transform, where you use Power Query to transform or clean the data. We'll walk you through this in upcoming videos as well. And finally, loading is the last step. This is the act of returning the cleaned up, transformed data back into Excel. Keep in mind, Power Query isn't just for cleaning up pasted data. You can import and transform data from other sources, like a file, a database, or even a web page. This is what I was trying to say earlier. You are more likely to be using Power Query from other sources like this, not within pasted data that we just did. So this example here, they use Power Query to get data from Wikipedia. So, and then these next few steps is actually just kind of setting up a page that they have dedicated to more videos to introduce you. I'm not going to go through those. These can be things that you guys can do in your own time. They recommend using 2 monitors, so if you guys are, you know, with your jobs, if you don't have 2 monitors, highly recommend using those anyway. So this is, like we said with Power Query, that did pop up in a new window, so it is kind of nice to have those 2 monitors to look at the data with. And these are the next few steps. So this link here, I can also put this link in the description just for you guys, but this will be in the Excel template once you download it, so you guys can go ahead and do that on your own. But I'll go ahead and I'll show you. We'll first start with the data from Wikipedia here. So what I'll do, I'm gonna switch over to it because I have it open. This is the Wikipedia page, and what it's going to do is going to find a table. So it's likely this one. I don't know if this, it depends on if the web page labels it as a table, then Power Query will know it can pull it or not. So what we'll do, data. Now you can do get data, but we have some like default options here. So from the web, I'm just going to copy this just to have this ready. So it prompts you with from web. We're just going to stick with basic. I just pasted in the URL. Connect. Okay, and once it connects, you see all these tables that are listed out here. So we can actually go ahead and look at some of the options here. So anything that's labeled a table, this is what Power Query is picking up from the web page. And this is something you guys can play around with on your own. I'm just kind of looking for the most interesting, and I think what we'll probably just end up doing is just grab the attendance here. So you can actually kind of see that there's three things that are looking kind of funky up here, right? So this is the part where, so if we loaded it, it would just come out like this into the Excel, but we want to transform it before before it's executed. Okay, so here's the window. I'm still doing this on one screen, by the way. And notice here, you can actually see the other query that we just worked on before. It's still up here. So let's go ahead, let's make some changes here. So we're going to actually delete the first two rows because they're repeating data. So we have that option right here. Let's get rid of those two. And I'm not really sure how to translate this. At the bottom is overall. This one looks like it came out a little bit funny at the bottom. I might just remove that just for the sake. Just one at the bottom. Just look at the columns one more time. And this is where we could rename ahead of time. Whether we do it now or once it loads, I guess it doesn't really matter, but it might be better to save time. But okay, so that's just what I'll do for the time. So you see the source, see these are all, this starts with the source and then follows each of the steps we did to clean it up. So if I go to close and load, getting the data, and it pops into the table I talked about earlier. So I'm just going to exit this out for the time being. So if this ever gets updated, like if we ever know how frequently it's going to update, we would just refresh it. So say maybe next month, maybe the data updates, we would just refresh and the data here would populate automatically. But from here, you know, you can go ahead and you can add extra columns. Say like to do extra math. If you just felt like doing the, if we wanted to always know like what was the max attendance. I don't know why this is important, I'm just making this up as I go. But you see how the rest of the table filled out there? I'm just going to do max. That's interesting. So this didn't pick up anything. So I'm going to open up the query again. So I go to data, queries, and connections. I want to edit this. When I go to edit is where the Power Query opens back up. Interesting. Okay, so this is coming in, this is general. So we actually, oh, this is text. So it's not, the max didn't work because it's looking for a number. So we need to update this to reflect a whole number. We could do the same thing for the attendance here. You know, things that we know are clearly numbers. So then we close and load. Give it a second to update. And there you go. So the beauty of this, though, too, if this were to refresh, if there was ever data added to the site and we refreshed, then this would also all update as well. Like the rows and the formula would keep following it down, so you wouldn't have to worry about keeping adding that every time that the data changes. It'll do it automatically for you, which is awesome. Alright everyone, that was it for the introduction to Power Query using the Microsoft Excel template tutorial. Hopefully this was helpful for you. I think it's kind of fun that you can pull data directly from websites like this. Keep in mind you probably can't do this. I don't think you can actually do this. It depends on the instance, but if you have to log into something that has a table, you probably need to have a workaround or some kind of permission to get it to connect. But if you can use a site where you don't need to log in, like Wikipedia, then you shouldn't have any issue with the Power Query if you're trying to pull data from there. I think I did enough rambling, so have fun with this, and thank you guys so much for watching.